Governments changed. Administrations changed. Security briefings continued, and life moved on. But Leah did not. And perhaps that is why her story continues to linger in the Nigerian conscience. Not because Nigerians enjoy reopening old wounds, but because unresolved wounds have a way of refusing closure. Her name became a reminder that national emergencies do not disappear simply because public attention moves elsewhere. Some questions remain. Some absences remain. Some responsibilities remain. And every time another school is attacked, every time another child disappears, every time another family waits for news, the nation is forced to confront those questions again. Because what troubles many Nigerians is not merely what happened, it is what followed. The feeling that a rare national moment slipped through our fingers. The feeling that an opportunity to demonstrate unmistakable national resolve was never fully seized. The feeling that a nation of immense resources, immense institutions, immense authority, and immense security capabilities somehow found itself repeatedly returning to the same conversation. Warning after warning, incident after incident, and headline after headline.
Attack reported, community dispersed,
perhaps
students missing, security operation underway,
is
residents
why
fleeing.
the memory remains so powerful. Because Chibok was not merely about Chibok. Leah Sharibu was not merely about Leah Sharibu. They became symbols of a nation wrestling with a question it has not yet fully answered. What are the lines that Nigeria refuses to permit to be crossed? And what consequences follow when those lines are crossed? Because history teaches a difficult lesson. Every time a line is left undefended, it eventually invites another challenge. Every warning left unanswered eventually invites another warning. Every consequence that fails to materialize eventually encourages another transgression. That is why this conversation is bigger than Chibok. It is bigger than Dapchi. It is bigger than Leah Sharibu. And bigger than Oyo. It is about the obligation of a state to communicate through action rather than words that there are certain lines
Distinguished security
it does
chiefs.
not permit to be crossed without consequence. And perhaps this is where complete honesty becomes necessary. The question confronting Nigeria today is no longer simply whether insecurity exists. The question is whether insecurity is gradually reshaping the expectations of an entire generation. Because a child raised in confidence dreams differently from a child raised in fear. A parent raising children in confidence plans differently from a parent raising children in fear. A teacher teaches differently when confidence exists. A farmer farms differently when confidence exists. A citizen participates differently when confidence exists. And a nation behaves differently when confidence exists. And that is why insecurity is no longer attacking only people. It is attacking possibilities. Possibilities. The possibility of learning, the possibility of investing, the possibility of traveling, the possibility of worshiping, the possibility of building, the possibility of dreaming, and the possibility of believing. And perhaps nowhere is that more dangerous than in the minds of young Nigerians.
Children should not have
Because
to grow up negotiate to
what
fear.
happens when a generation grows up believing that danger is normal? What happens when children begin organizing their expectations around fear? What happens when communities begin organizing their lives around vulnerability? What happens when insecurity ceases to interrupt normal life and starts becoming part of normal living? That is the danger. Not merely insecurity, but adaptation to insecurity. Not merely fear, but normalization of fear. Because a nation does not arrive at a national emergency in a single day. It arrives there warning by warning, incident by incident, adjustment by adjustment, and compromise by compromise. Until such a day, people find themselves living with conditions they once considered unacceptable. And that is why memory matters. That is why Chibok matters. That is why Leah Sharibu matters. That is why Deborah Samuel matters. And that is why Owo matters. That is why Benue matters. That is why Plateau matters. That is why Oyo matters. Because memory is how a nation measures the distance between what it once considered intolerable and what it has gradually learned to endure. And perhaps that is the most uncomfortable question of all. How much has Nigeria learned to endure that it should never have had to endure in the first place? Distinguished security chiefs, there is a danger greater than fear. It is not violence, it is not terrorism, it is not kidnapping, and it is clearly not banditry. The greater danger is when fear becomes ordinary, when fear becomes routine, when fear becomes expected. Because once a society begins expecting what should alarm it, something fundamental begins changing, not merely in its institutions, but in its people. An emergency that repeats itself often enough eventually stops shocking people. That does not mean it is less of an emergency. It makes it more dangerous. Because the moment a society becomes accustomed to what should alarm it, the emergency acquires a new victim. Not merely those directly affected, but the national conscience itself. And once a nation begins adapting itself to fear, rather than confronting the source of that fear, then it starts surrendering pieces of its freedom and sovereignty without realizing it. That is why recurring insecurity is so dangerous. Not because it continues and is allowed to fester, but because it slowly teaches people to expect it. And expectation changes behavior. Parents begin making decisions around fear. Students begin making decisions around fear. Farmers begin making decisions around fear. Investors begin making decisions around that fear. Communities begin taking and making decisions around fear. Entire regions begin making decisions around fear. And before long, fear stops being an interruption. It becomes a planning factor, a calculation, a permanent variable in ordinary life. Roads are evaluated through the lens of risk. Schools are evaluated through the lens of risk. Communities are evaluated through the lens of risk. Places of worship are evaluated through the same lens of risk. Travel is evaluated through the lens of risk. Opportunity itself begins negotiating with fear. That is not normal. A nation should never be carrying on like this. Not in the 21st century. Not after decades of governance. Not after repeated promises. Not after countless lessons learned. And yet, perhaps the most alarming development of all is this. Many Nigerians are no longer asking whether insecurity exists. They are living with it, planning around it, and calculating around it whilst adjusting to it. And that may be the most dangerous warning of all. Because the danger is no longer merely that insecurity exists. The danger is that insecurity is beginning to feel normal. And once fear becomes normal, extraordinary things begin to happen. Citizens lower expectations. Communities lower expectations. Families lower expectations. And the nation itself lowers expectations. People begin accepting conditions they once would have challenged. People begin enduring realities they once would have rejected. People begin adapting to circumstances they should never have had to adapt to in the first place. And that is how national emergencies become national conditions. Not overnight, but gradually, quietly, warning after warning, adjustment after adjustment, until one day a nation wakes up and discovers that what was once intolerable has become all too familiar. And that is the edge upon which Nigeria now stands. We will rest it here for now until the mailman returns next week to shed more light on this lingering insecurity dilemma confronting the nation through the rendition of a succession of 3 concluding letter chapters addressed to our security chieftains over the course of 3-week timeline. In chapter 3, we will highlight the meaning of protection in a republic. In chapter 4, we will delve into the challenge we are faced with. And in chapter 5, we will conclude the series in the final warning, beyond warnings, and the path forward. This has been the mailman, still delivering truth to power, a letter at a time. signing off for the people and enjoining everyone to remain blessed, to stay tuned in, and stay safe. Goodbye now.